So today I'm bringing 5 indie horrors that I think are worth checking out. Now, how I'm defining indie is a film that had a small budget, maybe didn't get a wide release, or is just not one that might be widely known. Now, this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but hopefully it's going to contain at least one that sounds intriguing. Also, please let me know in the comments some indie horrors that you love. I'd love to add them to my list to watch. Alright, so let's dive in. This was my first time watching Mike Flanagan's Absentia. Now, it's from 2011, and I watched it on Amazon Prime. This is very clearly an early movie of his, as well as its status as an indie movie. Now, it looks to be shot on video, lacking a lot of the cinematic qualities that we now see in his films. The acting in this, it's also a little bit spotty. There are some performances, especially with our 2 leads played by Katie Parker and Courtney Bell, that are great, but then others, questionable at best. Now, this is a different type of horror. Parker and Bell play sisters who have been away from each other for quite some time. Now, Bell's husband had gone missing several years back, with no clues to his whereabouts. The crux of the story revolves around a walking tunnel that's near Bell's home. Now, it seems to be the center of several disappearances, but it's not like everyone that walks in there disappears. And this is what I really enjoyed about the film. The concept that at any given point while walking through a location, you could just up and disappear. Now, I'm not going to get into other plot specifics because this really needs to be experienced unspoiled. There's creepy imagery in this with haunting and even frightening visuals that torment the characters. And plus, there's an emotional upheaval that's central to the plot, and that chaos helps to unnerve everything. And that's really where a lot of the tension comes in, with that emotional turmoil. I mean, there's a lot of great conflict that's established, causing frictions between several of the characters. This is a short watch at only 97 minutes, but the pace is a bit slower. Now, some of the story bounces back and forth with the visuals, so while it's not fully confusing, there are moments that if you're not paying attention, they may not totally make sense. The ending of this builds to a good climax too, but it does end with a fairly downer of a conclusion. So while this may not be Flanagan's strongest film, I really love the idea that he presents and then how he takes a simple idea and makes it somewhat creepy and very intriguing. Alright, so next up, this was one of those mid-pandemic surprises. Host takes advantage of the isolation of quarantine, the relatability of Zoom meetings, and then mixes in a supernatural element. Now, it's from 2020 and it's available on Shudder. A group of friends gets together online to do a seance, each in their own locations. And during the seance, connection issues happen as well as just some snarky drama and remarks, and then bad things really begin to happen. This was extremely tense. I mean, way more tense than I thought it was going to be. And the creep factor is pretty high too. There are things we see in the backgrounds as well as just some very unexpected occurrences within our characters. And as for as tense as this can be, there's also some comedy that's mixed in to help keep us off kilter. I mean, at least in the beginning of the movie. And because this is recorded as a Zoom call, the urgency is extremely high due to it feeling like it's playing out in real time. So everything is happening right now, adding a ton of apprehension when things start to go sideways. Now, another thing that this also has going for it is how short it is. I mean, it's just under an hour, but it manages to pack in unsettling scenarios that are ripe for scares. So next up is a comedy horror that's based on a video game. It's called Werewolves Within from 2021, and it's available on Showtime. Now, this is kind of like a whodunit where the residents of a small town in the middle of a snowstorm believe that a werewolf is wreaking havoc and killing people. And when they're all holed up in this local hotel, they then come to believe that one of them is the culprit, and the suspicions and the accusations then begin to fly. This was a really fun surprise when I first saw it. The dry comedy works well, and while the situations do become really tense, it's never a truly scary movie. Sam Richardson plays a forest ranger, and he's this super nice guy who tries to keep just always a level head, and he always wants to see the best in people and situations. And in this, I think his naivete is charming. Milana Vaintrub, who is also that AT&T woman from the commercials, well, she's a great mix with Richardson. They have this flirty banter that's sweet and sarcastic, and I really like their dynamic together. And the rest of the cast of characters is absurd and way overplayed, which makes them so much fun to watch. Everybody is amped and exaggerated to be over the top in their responses, which then makes for chaos when they all start arguing. The mystery angle of who or what is doing the killing is very engaging, and when I watched it the first time, I didn't figure out the culprit until towards the end. Now, the suspicions and the setups for the characters all make them plausible perpetrators. But is there even a killer? I mean, I love that the possibility exists that the town people are just jumping to conclusions and letting their imaginations take over, leading then to massive blowouts and accusations. This is another fairly short one at just 97 minutes, but it moves quickly without being rushed. Now, there is enough development on all of our characters to create some doubt and mistrust, but also to get us invested in the right characters that are worth rooting for. The violence is shocking at times, with some good bloody gore, but it's not overdone and it's only used when it complements the story. This is a really fun movie to see, especially as the first time watch because of all the intrigue. Alright, now we get to one that is certainly odd. It's Rubber from 2010, and I could only find it available for rent on demand. The basic premise is that a tire becomes sentient and starts killing people with some kind of psychic or telekinetic power. From the very get-go, this movie is completely self-aware, and it uses that to its advantage in setting up the offbeat humor. Now, we become very aware that we are part of the audience watching this play out, and that portions of the cast are aware of our presence. I mean, it's weird, but it does work. The kills in this are great, and we know when one is about to happen thanks to the camera focusing in on the tire as it begins to vibrate. And then carnage ensues. Now, it's strange enough that this tire just starts a killing spree, but then to compound the oddity, there's also a story of obsession at play. This one's a quick watch too at 82 minutes, and it's quiet for a lot of the presentation, but the story is inexplicably captivating. I mean, maybe it's the absurdity of a tire coming to life and then going on a killing spree, but I think part of what makes this so watchable and engaging is the meta aspect within the cast. There gets to be a sense of danger for the players, even though they're aware of us watching all of this play out. But with the danger, there's never any freakiness or anxiety that's caused, and there isn't any apprehensive tension built from the story either. So while this is a horror of sorts, it's not one that's designed to scare. It's meant to suck you in and have you kind of giggle at the ridiculous premise that's then complemented by great uses of gore. The acting is mostly tongue-in-cheek, and it's sometimes cheesy, but it works within the world that's built for the story. So if you've never seen Rubber, it's definitely worth checking out. The director of this, Quentin Dupieux, I think is how you say his name, well, he also directed another strange one that came out in 2020 called Mandibles, about this giant fly. Now, I still need to watch that, but if it's anything similar to Rubber, I'm sure to love it. Okay, so now we're at my honorable mentions, and funny enough, this one also contains an inanimate object that wreaks havoc on those around it. Now, this is the A24 film In Fabric from 2018, and I watched it on Showtime. Now, to say this is bizarre is a massive understatement. This is sort of a ghost or possession type story where this red dress happens to be present through a ton of tragedies. The presentation is very art house, and the setting is unsettling because it's time out of space. I mean, the costumes and the set designs appear like the time period would be anywhere from the late 60s or maybe even into the 70s, but then there are these employees at a clothing store that look like they're from the Victorian era. And with these workers, to call their dialogue strange is another massive understatement. There is a cryptic and unnatural sentence structure that they use with word choices that then make you have to concentrate hard to understand what it is they're saying. Now, I do believe that I know what the workers are, even though the story doesn't outright tell us. There are a lot of visual clues, but the why still evades me. Now, I can't figure out the purpose for having these characters be what they are, other than to unnerve us. This movie's almost 2 hours long, and I did feel the time a lot. Now, what makes this worth watching, aside from just the strangeness, is the tone of dread that's present from almost the beginning. It's undefined, but still very present and is incredibly effective at making us squirm because of the unsettling nature of everything. There are visuals that are aggravating to the senses, similar to watching another film that I'm about to discuss, where distorted imagery, flashes, and just agitating music work to create an unknown annoyance. It just makes us antsy and upset. Now, some of the other visuals are impressive and they're slightly creepy, especially when we see this dress begin to have a sentience, or at least a presence, absent of a person wearing it. Now, while there's not a ton of violence or gore in this, when there are moments of violence, it's visceral. There's also a very unnerving scene that's meant to be sensual and maybe even seductive, but it's so bizarre and creepily choreographed that the only thing I felt was a cringy disgust. But maybe that was the point. If you like strange, and I mean like really, really strange, and then you don't mind super art housey types of movies, maybe give this one a go. It's an experience to say the least. All right, my next honorable mention is Tetsuo, the Iron Man, from 1989. Now, I watched it on AMC+. Now, this is like a fever dream with some nasty and confusing visuals to begin. A businessman accidentally kills a dude with a metal fetish, who then takes his revenge by slowly turning the businessman into a hybrid of flesh and metal. There's pounding and driving music that makes for a frenetic and aggravating sensory overload that's then combined with some very messed up imagery. And portions feel like a music video where our characters break out into just spasmic dancing, usually only lasting a few seconds. The cinematography is visceral and it's even choppy at times, employing drop frames to create this stop motion effect in a lot of the scenes. Plus, there are a ton of weird angles and transitions that cut back and forth between aspects in rapid fire succession. It's discombobulating as a watching experience that's also pretty jolting to the eyes. There's also a creepy sensuality that's attempted to be introduced, but it ends up being more grotesque than anything sexy. This is a revenge flick at its core, and the movie certainly doesn't shy away from showing what would happen if you were turning into a machine. Body parts are creatively imagined and then executed. And this is violent and bloody with practical effects that are wonderfully executed. I mean, it's extremely unique. And there's a point toward the end of this that reminded me of the latter portion of Akira, where Tetsuo was morphing. Now, maybe this is an homage, I don't know, but it is an experience. This is only 67 minutes, but it's still effective in creating a tight story. There's a very haunting element in the last half of the film as all of the pieces begin to fall into place, explaining the madness that we've been witnessing. I mean, it's almost sensory overload with how chaotic scenes are displayed and then mixed with that pounding and driving music. This would have made for an insane anime, but it's even crazier that it's live action. This is probably the closest thing, though, that I've seen to anime being captured in real life. So if you want something that can make you squirm and maybe even gag, this one's going to do it. It also might give you a headache, but I think it's worth it. All right, so we've reached the end of my list, and I have saved my absolute favorite for now. Now, it's from 2015, and it's available on Peacock, and it's called The Invitation. Now, I know that another movie with that exact title came out just a bit ago, and that one is poo. So ignore that one, and then go straight for this disturbing and uncomfortable horror. The Invitation stars Logan Marshall Green and is about a group of friends who are getting together for a dinner party after not seeing each other for a few years. Marshall Green used to be married to the host of the party, and they share together a massive tragedy that still affects them, and rightfully so. From the outset, this is an unnerving presentation. There's an air of tension that's almost oppressive. I mean, it's there from the beginning, and it doesn't really ever let up. So much of the emotion, dread, and even terror comes from this excellently written dialogue. There is a ton of unspoken commentary and context to the conversations. And just as something feels awkward and uncomfortable, the story then adds a layer to that to make it even more distressing. As the night progresses, the conversations get pointed, emotional, sometimes vague, and certainly mysterious. And these wouldn't work nearly as well as they do if the cast couldn't create characters that are captivating. I mean, each of them has their own quirks, their hang-ups, and biases that feed into the overarching discomfort of the story. And because of the emotional rawness of some, comments and conversations can come across as threatening, insensitive, and biting. Now, tempers flare, which are then met with annoyingly calm reactions, and that then sets up self-doubt in the characters. I mean, are they just overreacting or maybe reading too much into something? This helps to raise the tension and then put me on the edge of my seat. And I love that this is a very contained story. It's one location in one evening, creating an urgency to what we feel, even though we're not sure why. But there's also a distinct point where the edge of the tensions becomes fierce, and then all the crap hits the fan. I mean, I find the end particularly haunting and with a massive relevance even for today, which I think makes this even more terrifying. This is only an hour and 40 minutes long, but it uses every single minute to make us uneasy and disturbed. Now, this is one that is a must-watch, and if it's been a while since you've seen it, it's time to rewatch it again. All right, so that's my list of indie horrors that you may want to check out. I know there are so many others that could have been on this list, but let me know some of yours that aren't widely known or maybe just had a tiny budget or even a release, but they're still worth seeing and awesome. If you enjoyed this, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.